Drezner, he is professor of international politics at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. He's also a trade expert who contributes to the Washington Post. Dan, great to have you with us. And in your most recent piece, you write that the concerns have not dissipated when it comes to the global economy. I want to get a sense from you of how loudly these alarms are sounding, how worried we should be about conditions globally and how they might permeate the U.S., how they might affect us here.
Well, globally, I think you should be pretty worried. There have been a number of major economies that have already tipped towards recession. We saw that Germany had negative growth in the second quarter. Same with the UK. Argentina is in free fall, and China's economy is also slowing. And while the United States is not as reliant on the global economy as some of the other major economies of the world, it's somewhat reliant. And furthermore, none of these economies are necessarily going to be rebounding anytime soon. It's not like the ECB, the European Central Bank, can cut interest rates anymore. So that's going to be a drag on U.S. economic growth, regardless of what the Federal Reserve does or what the Trump administration does. And so in some ways, that's the problem that Trump has. It's not just that a lot of his sort of policy quivers have already been shot through the tax cut and the budget deal and so forth. It's that he's actually at the mercy of forces beyond his control.
Sahil, I want to ask you how much of the blame we can lay here at the feet of President Trump. I was reading Paul Krugman's column yesterday, and a point he makes is maybe you can't put all the responsibility on President Trump, but you want an administration that is nimble, that is able to deal with this stuff as it comes up, to position the United States smartly in the face of what we're seeing, in the face of these global headwinds. Your sense of that, how much of a role President Trump, the Trump administration, has here in the global economic conditions we're seeing?
Presidents always get too much credit for a good economy, and they always get too much blame for a bad economy. The unique thing here is how much President Trump is reliant on a strong economy to maintain his political viability. His approval numbers are already weak, in the low 40s. That's not a good place to be for a president who's pursuing, who's going to be up for re-election. If the economy weakens, then the bottom falls out because he scores poorly on almost every other policy issue. He scores poorly on questions of leadership and character. So the question is what he can do, and Dan is right. He's raised spending by a lot. He's cut taxes by a lot. Interest rates have gone up a tiny bit, and then they've whipsawed a bit. But they're still relatively low by historical standards. What are the tools remaining that he has to boost the economy? I'm not sure I see any.
Yeah. Shannon, you heard a bit of his argument that he made there. You were at that rally, as I mentioned, last block. How crystallized is his message at this point? I mean, he talks about the Fed a lot. I think that's an abstract thing to a lot of people who follow the economy. He's basically saying, be blind, look ahead, we're going to be fine.
Right.
Of course, there's going to be a recession at some point.
And you mentioned earlier, this week he started blaming the media for the economy, that the media wants to tank the economy, like somehow we have the power of the global economy. His pitch that he made in New Hampshire, where he says, you have no choice to vote for me, but your 401k will tank. Well, you know who that message is to? It's to relatively affluent older people, because most of us here won't have to worry about our 401k for 20, 30 years. So that is a message to people he already has appealed to. He already has in his corner. So you definitely can't underplay how important the economy is to his reelection. And I was in Pittsburgh. He did an event at a factory there, a plastics factory, and I was talking to the workers, and one after another would say they dislike most of his message. They dislike him personally, but to Alexi's point a moment ago, they really like his economic message, and they feel like it's hard to disagree with that. So on election day, will it come down to moral character or money in the economy? It's hard to tell, but if you knock the legs out of the money economy side, you just have the moral character left, and that one he is losing people's backing on.
It'd be nice if we did have power over it.
You did have power over it. Alexi, you've been in Iowa recently, you've been talking to voters. I mean, how much confidence is there in that message? I mean, after a while, the message has to be met with something else. What's your sense of the patience that voters have for that message?
Well, I was just in Edina, Minnesota, talking with various Obama-Trump swing voters, and the thing that kept coming up was that they are sort of giving him the benefit of the doubt on this potential trade war with China and the tariffs that he wants to place on them, saying and hoping that if it works out, that could lead to significant growth for the economy. But they all sort of unanimously agreed that if it doesn't work out, we will more than likely be in a recession, at which point they will blame Donald Trump for that and vote against him. What's fascinating with the economic message is that when people are losing their jobs, whether it's in Lordstown, Ohio, or other places where these factories are shutting down, they more often than not, and you two probably know this just as well as I do not blame President Trump for something like that. They don't necessarily blame him for the low wages they're seeing, even though there are more jobs that they have to piece together. They don't blame him for those things, but if a recession happens, they will certainly blame him for that. And to Sahil's point, presidents get more credit than they deserve and more blame than they deserve. But I think that they see the way in which he is handling China in a way that they think is good when he's strong and sort of a bully with them. But they will totally leave him if it doesn't work out in their favor.
Dan Drezner, after the last recession, you wrote this book, The System Worked, kind of assessing how the global economy responded to what happened in 2007 and 2008. And bearing that in mind, I'm curious to get a sense from you here of how strong that system is now. I think a lot of folks are saying we're not looking at the kind of recession, the kind of crisis that we had back in 2007, 2008. But when you look at the integrity of the system, how strong is it? How well equipped is it to deal with a downturn the likes of which some say we're going to see very soon?
Yeah, I should start by stressing that the odds that we're going to see a replay of what happened in 2008, which was the worst financial crisis in a century, is extremely low. I mean, we're going to see a global downturn. If that happens, it's not going to be on that scale. That said, the problem is the system is much weaker than it was in 2008. The fact is interest rates across the board are much lower across most of the major economies. And more importantly, there isn't any kind of significant major coordination among the major G20 economies. Indeed, one of the sources for the slowdown is the fact that Donald Trump keeps talking about sanctioning and or raising tariffs against the other major economies of the world. He's done so repeatedly against China. He's done so with respect to steel and aluminum against the European Union. And so in some ways, part of the problem is that the global economy right now has to deal with what the economist Barry Eichengreen referred to as open mouth operations by the president, which is he keeps injecting uncertainty into what's happening. Even in the case where he temporarily delayed the tariff imposition in September, the problem is that doesn't affect uncertainty. And uncertainty is a killer for investment. And that's the source of the slowdown. It's not consumption. Consumers are still spending a fair amount. But what's happening is that businesses have decided we don't want to engage in significant amounts of investment.
Dan Drezner, the Fletcher School at Tufts, the Washington Post editorial page as well. Dan, thank you very much for the time on this Saturday. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Up next, new polling numbers